I honestly believe that history would be kinder to me than the contemporary Indian media.
History will be kinder to me than the contemporary media or the power.
These were the words of a true statesman and the stalwart of India's modern era, a person who served as the 13th Prime Minister of the largest democracy in the world, that is India. Today, we are talking about Dr. Manmohan Singh.
मुझे जो कुछ भी मिला है इस देश से ही मिला है। एक ऐसा देश जिसने बंटवारे के कारण बेघर हुए एक बच्चे को इतने ऊंचे पद तक पहुंचा दिया। ये एक ऐसा कर्ज है जिसे मैं कभी अदा नहीं कर सकता। ये एक ऐसा सम्मान भी है जिस पर मुझे हमेशा गर्व रहेगा।
We must do ourselves a favor today and just read Dr. Manmohan Singh's resume. Read just the education section and then the whole thing. Just one thing will come out of our mouth. Just incredible. If I start talking about his achievements, his education and portfolios held by Dr. Singh over the years, it would be a gross injustice to him and his wisdom. But still, just to give you some glimpse, we'll talk about Dr. Manmohan Singh's journey in a very brief way. So Dr. Manmohan Singh, born in the undivided India, in the parts of Pakistan currently, had to face the brunt of partition very devastatingly. He and his family had to bear the brunt of the partition, the horrors of partition, and eventually they moved on to Delhi. From the childhood, he was a very brilliant student. He pursued his Bachelor's of Arts, BA Economics Honours from Punjab University, Chandigarh, and eventually went on to do his MA Economics from Punjab University itself. After that, he went on to get Economics Tripos from University of Cambridge, and eventually a Doctorate of Philosophy, that is DPhil, from University of Oxford. Now, this was his education journey. On work front, after completing his DPhil, he went on to become a professor of economics at Punjab University, Chandigarh, and eventually he joined Delhi School of Economics as a professor. Over the years, he has also served as the Chief Economic Advisor under Ministry of Finance and also a Finance Secretary under Ministry of Finance as well. And eventually in 1982, he went on to become the Governor of Reserve Bank of India. Also, he has served as the Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission and then the Chairman of University Grants Commission as well, after which he was called by the then Prime Minister of India P.V. Narasimha Rao ji to serve as the Finance Minister of India from 1991 to 1996. So for these 5 years, he served as the Finance Minister of India, implementing some groundbreaking and path-breaking economic reforms for our country. After that, in 1998, he served as the leader of opposition in Rajya Sabha. And then comes the year 2004, where he went on to become the 13th Prime Minister of the world's largest democracy, that is India. And after that, in 2009, he again got re-elected to the office. And he was the first Prime Minister since Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who completed 10 years term in office, who got 2 consecutive terms as Prime Minister in independent India. Now, all these details which I just told you, these are just glimpses and highlights of his career. And this is not even a fraction of his illustrious and exemplary service which he has done for our great nation. So today, we talk about Dr. Manmohan Singh's legacy. And on the backdrop of this, we will also understand that what was his pivotal role which he played to mitigate the 1991 economic crisis faced by our country, and then eventually the reforms. Hello, my name is Preetpal Singh and you are watching Perspective. Now, Dr. Manmohan Singh passed away on 26 December 2024 at the age of 92 due to health-related and age-related issues.
The funeral of the veteran Indian leader began in the streets of the capital, Delhi, with armed guards and members of the security services walking alongside the procession.
एक विद्वान अर्थशास्त्री के रूप में और रिफॉर्म्स के प्रति समर्पित लीडर के रूप में उन्हें हमेशा याद किया जाएगा।
Now, to honor the legacy of the great statesman and an extraordinary visionary who reformed the whole of India, we will discuss about his instrumental role during the 1991 economic crisis. Now, even as a part of India's Nehruvian economic policy establishment, Dr. Singh, he showed us that he was not a blind believer of the planning process, nor was he blind to the threat of corruption in the government. Now, while he was delivering Vittal N. Chandrawakar lecture, memorial lecture at Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore in 1986, while he was the Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission, he very importantly remarked that planning is no panacea for economic ills. It all depends on the institutional setting of the country. He also said that Adam Smith's preference of laissez-faire economy was to an important degree the result of his knowledge of corruption in the British rule. He also said that if the basic preconditions of a fairly efficient and honest public administration are not satisfied, planning cannot be expected to lead to an improvement either in resource allocation or in income distribution for any country. So these were the views of Dr. Singh when he was the Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission. And also in one of the TTK memorial lecture given by him in Madras in 1983 while he was the Governor of Reserve Bank of India, he argued sharply for scaling back overly restrictive regulations on private enterprises in our country. He very famously remarked that I see no improvement unless there is a deliberate effort to confine detailed programming and licensing only to a manageable list of sectors and industries which are just of critical importance for our country. And he also remarked that in all the other cases, industrial licensing can be dispensed with, can be done away with. He said that government can still release the forecasts, the demand forecasts for the guidance of prospective or prospective entrepreneurs, but the choice of investment decisions should be left to them and not to the government. He also said that if growth of some of these industries is vital for sustaining the process of economic development of our country, a scheme of positive incentivization should be devised to attract investments for such kind of industries. He also said that licensing is a poor substitute for positive promotional measures in such cases. And these were the views of him in relation to industrial licensing before the 1991 reforms took place. Now, while he was concerned about industrial licensing and the perils of planning, he was also concerned a lot about widening inequalities. And in another 1983 lecture, he underscored the need for containing elite mass contradictions to avoid widespread social and economic unrest in the country. And this was not just in 1980s he was advocating these things. Many economists they point out that the trade protectionism done by Pandit Nehru, decades back was a mistake. Now, during that period of time, in 1950s, Dr. Manmohan Singh was completing his DPhil, Doctorate of Philosophy, and India's weak export performance in 1950s, it dismayed Dr. Singh as a DPhil candidate. Now, in his thesis, India's export trends and prospects of self-sustained growth, which was published in 1962, he argued that policymakers has underestimated India's export potential to a great extent. So he was of the opinion that during 1950s, our export potential was grossly underestimated by the policymakers, and we should have focused more on boosting our exports rather than building a closed economy, a closed economic setup where we want to focus just on the domestic industries and not open up our sectors for the other countries and not open up the trade between our country and the other world. He remarked in his thesis that Indian planners were swayed by undue export pessimism, which led to neglect of the scope and potential of export growth and to sacrifice the important efficiency gains associated with the greater emphasis on international specialization. So these were the benefits which India could not gain because they were not focusing and they were undermining and underestimating the export potential of India. So during 1950s and 1960s only, Dr. Singh was of the opinion that India's export sector has a very great potential which needs to be unleashed by the government. And he also remarked during that period of time that in fact, given sensible domestic policies in areas so as to control inflation and having a more realistic exchange rate policies, India's exports could do much better than assumed by India's development planners. This is what Dr. Singh said during his thesis. And eventually we will see that these learnings of Dr. Singh during his DPhil and eventually when he went on to serve as the professor at Punjab University and professor at Delhi School of Economics and different other roles with the government of India as well, all the things which he realized and all the observations which he made will be inculcated into the 1991 economic reforms. And you will see that all the learnings will be put into application in the 1991 economic reforms. That is why these reforms are so important.
We have to harness all our latent resources for a second industrial revolution and a second agricultural revolution. We commit ourselves to providing a firm and purposeful sense of direction to the reform process so that this ancient land of India regains its glory and rightful place in the comity of nations.
हजारों जवाबों से अच्छी है मेरी खामोशी न जाने कितने सवालों की आबरू रश.
Now, political interventions leading to inefficiency in public sector undertakings, price controls, and role of trade unions in sick and struggling firms were the areas of concern which Dr. Singh recognized as the points or as the factors holding India back. And when eventually Dr. Manmohan Singh became the finance minister of our country in 1991, India's economy was on the verge of an economic collapse. The country had only a foreign exchange reserves just for the next 2 weeks. And this was made worse by the weakening of the Soviet Union in 1980s and eventually the disintegration of Soviet Union in 1991, which had been a source of cheap oil and raw material and a market for Indian products. India had been able to trade without needing US dollars because of their relationship with the Soviet Union. But since it got disintegrated, it worsened the crisis in India even further. And all these things, it led to rising import costs in India and eventually inflating our import bills. And since our exports were negligible, this led to creation of a negative trade balance, whereby India's import expense was more than India's export earnings or export income. This led to creation of a balance of payment crisis in India during 1991. And this got even worse because of the start of the Gulf War, where the price of oil and petroleum soared even very, very high. So it again put a lot of pressure on our import bills. And alongside this, Indian government was having already a very high fiscal deficit, which worsened the problem even further. And all these things combined together, alongside the political instability in India, where every few years Prime Minister or the government of India was changing. 1988, it was Rajiv Gandhi ji. After that, Chandrasekhar, VP Singh, and eventually then PV Narasimha Rao. So if the government were not stable, in 1991 PV Narasimha Rao became the Prime Minister. If the governments were not stable, how could economic sense or economics of a country would be stable? It won't be possible. So in all of these scenarios, India's economy was on the verge of collapse after just 2 weeks, and this is where Dr. Manmohan Singh comes into play, and he takes charge as the finance minister of the country and comes up with sweeping economic reforms that will change the trajectory of the whole country, not just for those years, but for generations and generations to come. Dr. Manmohan Singh, during the budget presentation of the 1991-1992, said that the new government, which took office just a month ago, has inherited an economy in serious trouble. The balance of payment situation is critical, and until November 1989, when the previous parties were in power, there was strong international confidence in India's economy. However, after that, due to political instability, due to Gulf War, and due to the other worsening fiscal issues in our country, international confidence has weakened significantly on our country. And this all has led to a sharp decline in the capital inflows, the foreign investments into our country. And despite borrowing large amounts from International Monetary Fund in 1990 and 1991, we were not able to stop this crisis. India's foreign exchange reserves, they dropped drastically. And while all these things were happening, people of India were facing double-digit inflation, which was hurting the poor sections of the society the most. And in sum, the crisis of the economy is both acute and deep as well. He said that we have not experienced anything similar in the history of independent India. That is why this crisis is very, very serious. Now, in the face of this economic crisis, Dr. Singh, he decided to introduce economic reforms. So from all the learnings which he had previously, while working as the governor of RBI, or working in the Ministry of Finance, working in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, or any other ministry, any other portfolio, working as the Planning Commission, while working in all the other portfolios, whatever the learnings he had, now was the chance where he could put those learnings into application and apply those learnings for the betterment of the whole country. And that is what exactly he did. So these reforms which he introduced, we call them as LPG reforms. The full form is liberalization, privatization and globalization. That means it liberalized sectors of our economy, it privatized the government entities, and it globalized Indian economy. It connected Indian economy with the outside world. So now our economy, from a socialist centered economy, we were moving towards a market economy. That would be run by market oriented principles, that is the principles of demand demand and supply. In his 1991-1992 budget speech, Dr. Singh, he changed the direction of Indian economy by saying that over-centralization and excessive bureaucratization of economic processes have proved to be counterproductive for India, and that India needed to expand the scope and the area of operation of market forces. And he also said that the key purpose of these reforms would be to increase the efficiency and international competitiveness of industrial production, to utilize for this purpose foreign investments and foreign technology to much greater extent than what we have done in the past. Now, out of many reforms which were introduced, one very important one was devaluation of rupee and trade liberalization. Now, in July 1991, RBI pledged 46.9 tons of gold with the Bank of England and Bank of Japan to raise $400 million, which stabilized the immediate crisis. Now, Dr. Singh then, he devalued Indian rupee to make Indian exports more competitive and cheaper for the international markets. He also reduced import tariffs and dismantled restrictions on foreign trade, which allowed India to integrate to the global economy, which we currently call as globalization. Also, alongside this, one major reform was in doing away with the license Raj. That was the industrial policy reforms, where he abolished a license Raj in our country. So on July 24, 1991, Dr. Singh presented a new industrial policy for our nation, which ended the license Raj previously. Now previously, the companies, they needed the government's approval for most of their operations, including even expansion and production. Now this new policy, it deregulated nearly 80% of the industrial sector, reducing the number of industries reserved exclusively for the public sector from 17 to 8 and eventually to 3. And this encouraged private enterprises to come and join the sectors where they were not allowed before, and foreign investments coming into the country and fostering industrial growth and job creation in our country as well. And all of this is what we call as privatization. Now, while he introduced all these reforms in banking and financial sectors as well, he introduced path-breaking reforms. The financial sector underwent significant changes under his leadership. Now, following the Narsimham Committee's recommendations, the statutory liquidity ratio SLR was reduced from 38.5, which was humongous, to 25%. And CRR, that is cash reserve ratio, was lowered from 25% to 10% over a few years. And currently the SLR is 18%, and CRR, it has been recently reduced to 4%. And you see at that point of time how high SLR and CRR was. And for those of you who know, if CRR and SLR is very high, the credit creation ability of the bank gets reduced. So the loan which are made by the bank or dispersed by the bank, their value reduces if these reserves are very high, because then the banks focus their majority of the money to keeping them as reserves than lending. So reduction of reserves led to more and more lending into the economy, more and more credit creation in the economy, and more working of the money multiplier or credit multiplier. Now these measures, it allowed our country to boost credit, to support economic expansion, and also licensing requirements for the bank branches, they were also eased, and interest rates, they were deregulated, creating a more competitive and efficient banking system of our country. Now his reforms not only saved our country from the verge of economic collapse, but also laid the foundations for a sustained economic growth, which will go on not for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, but for the next many decades. Now, all these policies introduced by him, they attracted foreign investments to a great extent. It boosted exports of our country and also created new industries. Now, millions of Indians during this period of time, they got new jobs. They got humongous job opportunities. And by dismantling socialist control in our country, India transitioned into a market-driven economy, setting the stage to rise as the world's fastest growing economy in the coming future. Now, while all the things seemed great, India came out of the economic collapse and economic crisis and was growing perfectly fine. Dr. Singh at that point of time had to undergo a trial by fire. He faced several questions from media, from his own political party itself, and definitely from the opposition, whereby opposition even leveled the charges that he and his government was trying to sell the nation to the foreign powers. Now he addressed an unscheduled press conference on July 25th, 1991, a day after the presentation of Union Budget for that year. Now a political leader, Vajiram Ravi, in his book To the Brink and the Back, India's 1991 Economic Story, he recalled that the then finance minister had had to call a press conference to ensure that the message of this budget did not get distorted by less enthusiastic officials. And finally, over several months, he was able to broadly build a consensus over these reforms and implement them in an effective and efficient manner. Now, from 3 to 3.5% growth rate which India had previously, India jumped to 8 to 8.5% growth rate in just a matter of few years. And this was nothing short of a miracle for the country who was at the brink of economic crisis in 1991. Now, these groundbreaking reforms, they changed the foundations of the whole country to an extent and changed the path or the economic trajectory of the whole country in a very, very major way. Now, many companies, they started to come into India. Many investors, they started to invest in India. Foreign direct investments, foreign institutional investments, foreign portfolio investments into India increased to a great length. And domestic companies also started to emerge in the sectors where they were not allowed before. And India got connected to the whole world in a major way which was not existing before the 1991 reforms. And finally, when Dr. Singh went on to become the Prime Minister of India in 2004 and again get re-elected in 2009, he implemented these reforms and he took these reforms to even greater heights and also implemented several social measures as well to ensure that these economic reforms, the benefit of these economic reforms is widespread across different sections of the society as well, so as to build economic equity and economic equality. Now, this reminds me of the lines which he said that as we enter the last decade of the 20th century, India stands at the crossroads. The decisions we take and the ones we do not take at this juncture will determine the shape of things to come for quite some time. It should come as no surprise, therefore, that an intense debate rages throughout the country as to the path we should adopt. This is what Dr. Manmohan Singh has said during his budget speech. So by the passing away of Dr. Singh, it is a very, very great and devastating loss for our nation. India has not just lost a true son, but lost a true visionary, has lost a great nation builder, a reformer, and an astute and honest statesman who was revered and respected from all the quarters, irrespective of the party lines and irrespective of the domains. We are honoring the legacy of Dr. Manmohan Singh by discussing his path-breaking reforms.
माना कि तेरी दीद के काबिल नहीं हूँ मैं माना कि तेरी दीद के काबिल नहीं हूँ मैं तो मेरा शौक तो देख मेरा इंतजार देख
Now, I hope you gained a new perspective from this session and got to know new information from this session as well. Do let me know what are your views surrounding these economic reforms in the comment section. I'll be very happy to read them. All the very best and have a great day. Thank you.